The bitter October wind whipped through Cleveland's streets as Detective Sarah Martinez sat in her unmarked patrol car, reviewing case files while sipping lukewarm coffee from her thermos. At 34, she had seen enough domestic violence. Cases to know that Monday mornings often brought the worst calls, weekend tensions, boiling over into something much darker. Her partner of 3 years, Rex, a magnificent German shepherd with intelligent amber eyes, dozed peacefully in the back seat, his steady breathing the only sound breaking the early morning silence. The radio crackled to life at exactly 8:47 a.m., shattering the calm. Unit 247, we have a domestic disturbance at 1247 Maple Street. Neighbors report screaming and sounds of struggle. Ambulance requested. Possible assault victim. Sarah's heart sank. Another family torn apart by violence. She had joined the force 8 years ago, hoping to make a difference. But some days the endless cycle of abuse felt overwhelming. Copy that. Dispatch. Unit 247 responding. Sarah replied, already starting the engine. Rex's ears perked up at the familiar sound, his training kicking in as he sensed the shift from routine patrol to active duty. A beautiful residential neighborhood of Maple Street seemed incongruous with violence. White picket fences, manicured lawns, and children's bicycles scattered across driveways painted a picture of suburban tranquility. The Thompson house sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, its pale blue siding and flower boxes giving no hint of the horror within. Sarah noticed the front door standing ajar, unusual for the chilly morning. She radioed for backup and approached. Cautiously, Rex at her side, both of them alert for any signs of ongoing danger. The silence felt heavy, broken only by the distant wail of approaching sirens. Cleveland Police, Sarah announced, pushing the door open wider. The acrid smell of fear and something metallic hit her immediately. The living room was in disarray, overturned. Furniture, broken glass from a shattered picture frame, and dark stains on the hardwood floor that made her stomach clench. But it was the scene in the center of the room that made her blood run cold. Jessica Thompson, 28 years old according to the driver's license Sarah would later examine, lay motionless near the bottom of the staircase. Her auburn hair was matted with blood, her face swollen beyond easy recognition. A tall man with disheveled brown hair and wild eyes paced frantically around her body, his hands shaking as he gestured helplessly. "Thank God you're here." Marcus Reed, 32, Jessica's live-in boyfriend, rushed toward Sarah with relief flooding his voice. "She fell down the stairs. I heard this terrible crash and found her like this. I called 911 immediately. Is she going to be okay?" His words tumbled out in a panicked stream, but something about his demeanor set off alarm bells in Sarah's experienced mind. While Reed continued his frantic explanation, Sarah's trained eyes swept the scene. The blood patterns didn't match a simple fall. There were spatters on the wall at shoulder height, suggesting impact from multiple directions. Jessica's injuries appeared concentrated on her head and torso, not the type typically seen in stairway accidents. Most telling was the absence of any damage to the stair railing or signs of a body tumbling down. But it was Rex who detected what Sarah's human senses had missed. The German shepherd's nose twitched as he caught a scent, his body tensing as he moved toward the far corner of the living room. There, behind an overturned armchair, Sarah spotted something that made her heart break, a tiny sneaker, barely visible beneath a fallen cushion. "Is there a child in the house?" Sarah asked sharply, her protective instincts flaring. Reed's face went pale, his confident narrative suddenly faltering. "Emma, Jessica's daughter. She's only 3. I forgot with all this chaos," he stammered. But Sarah was already moving toward the corner where Rex had positioned himself. What she found there would haunt her for years to come. Little Emma Thompson sat huddled in the narrow space between the chair and wall, her small body curled into a protective ball. The child's blonde curls were tangled, her pink pajamas torn at the shoulder. But it was her eyes that stopped Sarah cold-wide, blue, and filled with a terror no 3-year-old should ever experience. "Hello, sweetheart," Sarah whispered, crouching down slowly. "I'm Sarah, and this is Rex. We're here to help you." But Emma didn't respond, didn't even blink. She sat frozen like a small statue, her gaze fixed on some invisible point beyond Sarah's shoulder. The child was clearly in shock, her young mind unable to process whatever horror she had witnessed. Rex, sensing the child's distress, approached with a gentle patience that made him exceptional at his job. He lay down a few feet away from Emma, making himself appear smaller and less threatening. For the first time since Sarah had entered the room, Emma's eyes moved, tracking the dog's movements with what might have been curiosity beneath the fear. The paramedics arrived in a flurry of activity, immediately working to stabilize Jessica, while Reed hovered nearby, maintaining his story about the accidental fall. Sarah noticed how Emma's tiny body tensed whenever Reed's voice rose, how she seemed to shrink even further into her hiding spot. Years of experience with domestic violence cases had taught Sarah to read these subtle signs. Emma wasn't just traumatized by finding her mother injured. She had witnessed something far worse. As Jessica was loaded onto a stretcher, still unconscious but showing vital signs, Sarah made a decision that would shape everything that followed. Instead of allowing Emma to be whisked away by social services immediately, she requested permission to accompany the child to the hospital, with Rex at their side. "She's responding to the dog," Sarah explained to the social worker who arrived on scene. Sometimes animals can provide comfort when humans can't reach a traumatized child. It was true, but Sarah had another reason. She suspected Emma held the key to understanding what had really happened in that house, and building trust would be crucial to uncovering the truth. As they prepared to leave, Sarah caught Emma stealing one more glance at Rex, who remained calmly at the detective's side. In that moment, Sarah saw something flicker in the child's eyes, not just fear, but recognition. Emma had seen Rex as friend, not foe, in a world that had suddenly become very dangerous indeed. The ambulance doors closed with Jessica inside, sirens wailing as it disappeared toward Cleveland General Hospital. Reed was taken in for questioning, still insisting on his story of an accidental fall. And Sarah, with Rex beside her and tiny Emma wrapped in a paramedic's blanket, began what would become the most important case of her career, one where justice would ultimately depend on helping a terrified 3-year-old find her voice again. The fluorescent lights of Cleveland General Hospital's pediatric wing cast harsh shadows as Detective Sarah Martinez sat beside Emma Thompson's hospital bed, watching the 3-year-old stare blankly at the cartoon characters dancing across the OSEA television screen. 48 hours had passed since that horrific morning on Maple Street, and Emma hadn't spoken a single word. Not to the nurses, not to the social workers, not even to whisper a request for water or food. Dr. Patricia Chun, the hospital's chief pediatric psychiatrist, emerged from her consultation with Emma's medical team, her expression grave. "Selective mutism is common in children who've experienced severe trauma," she explained to Sarah in hushed tones. "The mind creates protective barriers when reality becomes too overwhelming to process. Emma's brain is essentially shielding her from memories too painful to confront." But Sarah had noticed something the medical professionals had missed. Every time Rex appeared in the doorway during their visits, Emma's rigid posture would soften almost imperceptibly. Her vacant stare would shift, following the German Shepherd's movements, with what appeared to be genuine interest, the first sign of engagement she'd shown since the incident. Meanwhile, Marcus Reed's carefully constructed story was crumbling under Detective Martinez's relentless investigation. In the sterile interrogation room at the precinct, Reed maintained his composure, but cracks were beginning to show. "I've told you 100 times," he insisted, running his hands through his greasy hair. Jessica was drunk. She stumbled at the top of the stairs and fell. It was a terrible accident. However, the toxicology report had arrived that morning, and Reed's foundation of lies was about to collapse entirely. "Funny thing about that blood test, Marcus," Sarah said, sliding the report across the metal table. Jessica's blood alcohol level was 0, completely sober. So either she had the most spectacular sober fall in medical history, or someone's been lying to us. Reed's face drained of color as he stared at the damning evidence. His confident demeanor wavered, replaced by the desperate scrambling of a man watching his alibi disintegrate. Maybe ... maybe the test is wrong. Labs make mistakes all the time, right? She was definitely drinking the night before. Maybe it just hadn't shown up yet? Sarah leaned back in her chair, studying Reed's micro-expressions. 20 years in law. Enforcement had taught her to read the subtle tells of deception, the rapid blinking, the unconscious touching of the nose, the way his voice pitch rose when he lied. This man was hiding something significant. The deeper Sarah dug into Jessica and Marcus's relationship, the darker the picture became. Hospital records revealed a troubling pattern that made her stomach turn. 6 months earlier, Jessica had been treated for a dislocated shoulder. The attending physician's notes indicated the injury was inconsistent with patient's explanation of slipping in the shower. 3 months after that, broken ribs again, with an explanation that didn't match the injury pattern. Sarah's next stop was Jessica's workplace, a small dental practice in downtown Cleveland, where she worked as a hygienist. The office manager, Patricia Williams, was eager to talk, her relief at having someone finally ask questions evident in every word. "Jessica changed so much over the past year," Patricia explained, twisting her wedding ring nervously. "She used to be so bubbly, always talking about Emma, sharing photos. But lately ... double quotes." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "She became withdrawn, jumpy, always wearing long sleeves, even during that heat wave in July. When I asked if everything was okay at home, she just changed the subject." The most damning revelation came from Jessica's colleague, Maria Santos, who had worked alongside her for 3 years. "Last month, Jessica came in with what looked like finger marks on her throat," Maria whispered, glancing around nervously. "When I asked about it, she said she'd gotten tangled in Emma's junk rope while playing. But Jessica was terrified of Marcus. I could see it in her eyes whenever he picked her up from work. She'd tense up the moment she saw his car." Back at the hospital, Emma remained in the care of her Aunt Linda Thompson, Jessica's younger sister, who had flown in from Denver the moment she heard the news. Linda was a kindergarten teacher with gentle eyes and infinite patience, but even she couldn't break through Emma's wall of silence. "She used to chatter constantly," Linda told Sarah, tears streaming down her face. Emma would tell elaborate stories about her stuffed animals, sing songs she'd learned from cartoons, ask a million questions about everything. Now it's like she's disappeared inside herself. Sarah made daily visits to the hospital, always bringing Rex along. Hospital policy typically prohibited animals in patient rooms, but Dr. Chun had made an exception after witnessing Emma's subtle but notable response to the German Shepherd's presence. During these visits, Sarah would sit quietly, allowing Rex to position himself near Emma's bed, while she spoke softly about nothing in particular: the weather, hospital food, funny stories about other cases, carefully edited for a young audience. It was during the 5th visit that Sarah witnessed something remarkable. Emma had been sitting cross-legged on her hospital bed, absently coloring in a princess coloring book Linda had brought her. Rex lay on his favorite spot near the window, sunlight warming his dark fur. Suddenly, Emma's crayon stopped moving. She looked up at Rex with genuine focus for the first time since the incident. Very slowly, Emma reached into the plastic bag of personal items Linda had packed for her. She pulled out a small, worn teddy bear wearing a tiny police officer's uniform, a gift from a community outreach program at Emma's preschool. Without breaking eye contact with Rex, she held the bear out in his direction. Rex, trained to read human emotions and respond appropriately, rose gracefully and padded over to Emma's bedside. He sat perfectly still as the little girl gently touched the teddy bear to his nose, as if introducing them. For just a moment, the ghost of a smile flickered across Emma's face before disappearing back into the protective wall she'd built around herself. She's trying to communicate, Dr. Chand observed later, reviewing the security footage of the interaction. Emma recognizes Rex as a safe presence, possibly the only safe presence in her current reality. The teddy bear gesture suggests she's attempting to create connections between positive symbols and Rex. This could be crucial for her eventual recovery. That evening, as Sarah sat in her apartment reviewing case files, Rex sleeping peacefully at her feet, she felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Emma Thompson held the key to bringing Marcus Reed to justice, but unlocking that door would require patience, trust, and perhaps a miracle. The little girl had witnessed something terrible enough to steal her voice now. Sarah had to help her find the courage to speak truth to power, even if that truth came from the lips of a traumatized 3-year-old. The clock on Sarah's wall ticked past midnight as she continued working, driven by the memory of Emma's frightened eyes and the growing certainty that Marcus Reed was a dangerous predator who couldn't be allowed to hurt anyone else. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new evidence, and hopefully new progress in reaching the silent witness whose testimony could change everything. The Cleveland Police Forensics Lab hummed with activity as Detective Sarah Martinez stood over the blood spatter analysis results, her jaw clenched in determination. 3 weeks had passed since that devastating morning on Maple Street, and every piece of evidence pointed to one inescapable conclusion. Marcus Reed was a cold-blooded predator who had nearly beaten Jessica Thompson to death. The pattern tells the whole story, explained Dr. Marcus Webb, the department's lead forensic analyst, pointing to the detailed photographs spread across the examination table. See these impact spatters on the wall? They're consistent with multiple blunt force strikes to the head and torso. The velocity and directionality indicate Jessica was struck at least 6 times, possibly more. Sarah studied the gruesome images, her years of experience allowing her to read the violence like a textbook. What about Reed's story that she fell down the stairs? Dr. Webb shook his head emphatically. Impossible. A fall would create drag patterns, smearing and blood trails, consistent with a body in motion. What we have here is evidence of a sustained, stationary beating. Jessica was trapped in that living room while someone methodically attacked her. The forensic evidence was damning, but Sarah needed more than blood patterns to secure a conviction. She had spent countless hours interviewing neighbors, co-workers, and anyone who had regular contact with Jessica and Marcus. The picture that emerged was of an abusive relationship spiraling toward inevitable tragedy. Eleanor Hutchins, the 73-year-old neighbor who lived directly next door, had become Sarah's most valuable witness. Over tea in her immaculate kitchen, Eleanor revealed disturbing details about the Thompson household that painted Marcus Reed as a controlling monster. That poor girl was walking on eggshells, Eleanor confided, her weathered hands shaking as she poured another cup of chamomile tea. I'd hear him screaming at her, through the walls, terrible language, threats about what he'd do if she ever left him. Just last month, I saw Jessica in the backyard with little Emma, and she had these awful bruises on her arms. When I asked if she was okay, she just smiled and said she'd been clumsy. Eleanor's testimony was powerful, but Sarah knew defense. Attorneys would argue it was hearsay and conjecture. She needed concrete evidence of Marcus's history of violence, something that would prove this wasn't an isolated incident. A breakthrough came from an unexpected source: Jessica's cell phone records. Hidden in her call history were multiple calls to the National Domestic Violence Hotline, dating back 8 months. The longest call lasted 43 minutes made. At 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday night in July, Sarah contacted the hotline, and after navigating privacy protocols and obtaining proper warrants, she was able to speak with Michelle Rodriguez, the crisis counselor who had taken most of Jessica's calls. She was terrified, Michelle recalled, her voice heavy with sadness. Jessica called us 17 times over several months. She had an escape plan. She was saving money, researching apartments, trying to figure out how to leave safely with her daughter. The last time we spoke, she said Marcus had started threatening Emma directly, using the child as leverage to control her. This revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Not only had Marcus been abusing Jessica, but he had been using 3-year-old Emma as a weapon to ensure Jessica's compliance. The psychological torture was almost worse than the physical violence. Sarah's investigation expanded to Marcus Reed's background, revealing a disturbing pattern she wished she had discovered sooner. His ex-wife, Diana Reed, had filed for a restraining order 3 years earlier, citing physical abuse and threats. The police report from their divorce proceedings made for chilling reading. "He broke my wrist when I tried to leave the first time," Diana testified during their custody hearing. "When that didn't stop me, he threatened to hurt our children. I've been in hiding for 2 years because I'm still afraid of what he might do." Diana had remarried and moved to Phoenix with her 2 young sons, but she agreed to speak with Sarah via phone. Her voice trembled as she recounted years of systematic abuse that followed the exact same pattern Jessica had experienced. "It always started small," Diana explained. "A push here, a slap there, always followed by apologies and promises to change. But it escalated quickly. By the end, I was afraid to breathe too loudly because it might set him off. When I heard about what happened to that poor woman and her little girl, I knew Marcus had finally crossed the line I always feared he would." Back at the hospital, Emma remained in her Aunt Linda's care, showing slow but encouraging signs of progress. The selective mutism was beginning to crack, though not in ways anyone expected. Emma had started whispering to her teddy bear during Detective Martinez's visits, carrying on elaborate conversations that no one else could hear. Dr. Chun believed these whispered monologues were Emma's way of processing trauma, safely expressing thoughts and memories she wasn't ready to share with the adult world. Children often use play therapy and imaginary conversations to work through difficult experiences, she explained to Sarah and Linda. The fact that she's verbal with the toy suggests her voice is still there, just protected by layers of fear. The most significant development came during Sarah's 10th visit to the hospital. Emma was sitting in her usual spot by the window, Rex lying peacefully nearby, when she suddenly stood up and walked directly to the German Shepherd. Without hesitation, she sat down next to him and began stroking his fur while whispering something. Too quiet for anyone else to hear. Rex remained perfectly still, his training and natural intuition telling him this moment was crucial. Emma continued her whispered conversation for nearly 5 minutes before returning to her chair, but the breakthrough was evident to everyone in the room. "She's building trust," Dr. Chun observed. "Rex represents safety in a world that has become terrifying. Emma is testing whether she can share her secrets with him without consequences." Meanwhile, the legal case against Marcus Reed was becoming airtight. The district attorney's office had assigned their most experienced prosecutor, Janet Williams, to handle the case. Williams had a reputation for securing convictions in domestic violence cases, and she was determined to ensure Reed never hurt another family. "We have physical evidence, forensic analysis, witness testimony, and a clear pattern of escalating abuse," Williams told Sarah during a strategy meeting. But you know what would make this case absolutely bulletproof? The child's testimony. Sarah felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Emma held the key to ensuring Marcus Reed spent decades in prison, but asking a traumatized 4-year-old to relive the worst moment of her life seemed almost cruel. She's not ready, Sarah admitted. Emma barely speaks to her own aunt. How can we expect her to testify in front of strangers about watching her mother nearly get beaten to death? Williams leaned forward, her expression serious. Reed's defense attorney is going to argue that everything we have is circumstantial. Without Emma's testimony placing him at the scene during the assault, there's a chance he could walk on a technicality. We can't let that happen. As if sensing the gravity of the situation, Rex lifted his head from where he had been resting and looked directly at Sarah. In his intelligent amber eyes, she saw the same determination she felt burning in her own chest. Somehow, they would find a way to help Emma find her voice. The alternative, letting Marcus Reed escape justice and potentially hurt other innocent families, was simply unacceptable. The clock was ticking, and Emma Thompson's courage would soon determine whether justice prevailed or evil walked free once again. The imposing limestone facade of the Cuyahoga County Courthouse stood like a monument to justice against Cleveland's gray November sky. Media vans lined East 21st Street, their satellite dishes reaching toward the clouds as reporters prepared for what had already been dubbed the silent witness trial by local news outlets. Detective Sarah Martinez adjusted her navy blazer as she walked up the courthouse steps, Rex padding silently beside her, both of them ready to face the most important case of their careers. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere crackled with tension and anticipation. Word had leaked about the traumatized 3-year-old witness, and the public was captivated by the story of a little girl who might hold the key to convicting her mother's alleged attacker. Victims' rights advocates packed the gallery alongside curious citizens, all hoping to witness justice served in this heartbreaking case. Marcus Reed sat at the defense table, his appearance dramatically transformed from the disheveled, panicked man Sarah had first encountered at the crime scene. His attorney, Jonathan Mitchell, had clearly coached him well. Reed wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his hair neatly trimmed, his expression conveying what Mitchell hoped would read as concerned innocence rather than guilty desperation. Mitchell was known throughout Cleveland's legal community as a skilled defense attorney who specialized in creating reasonable doubt where none should exist. At 52, he had built his reputation on dismantling prosecution cases through aggressive cross-examination and clever manipulation of evidence. His strategy for the Reed case was already becoming clear paint. Jessica is an unstable alcoholic whose tragic accident was being sensationalized by overzealous prosecutors seeking headlines. Prosecutor Janet Williams sat opposite Mitchell, her files organized with military precision, every piece of evidence cataloged and ready for presentation. At 45, Williams had prosecuted over 200 domestic violence cases, winning convictions in 90% of them. She understood the unique challenges of cases like this: victims who couldn't testify, witnesses afraid to speak, and defense attorneys willing to blame everyone except their guilty clients. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Williams began. During her opening statement, her voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. Over the next several days, you will hear evidence that will paint a clear picture of systematic abuse, escalating violence, and a man who nearly beat the mother of a 3-year-old child to death in her own living room. She moved gracefully before the jury box, making eye contact with each of the 12 citizens who would decide Marcus Reed's fate. "The defendant wants you to believe this was a tragic accident, that Jessica Thompson, a devoted mother and dental hygienist, somehow fell down the stairs with such force that she sustained multiple skull fractures and internal bleeding. But the evidence will show you something very different." Williams clicked a remote, and the courtroom's large screen displayed the first of many disturbing images. This is not the scene of an accident. This is the aftermath of attempted murder. The forensic photographs were devastating in their clarity. Blood spatter patterns on the walls, overturned furniture, and the clear outline of where Jessica's body had been found painted an undeniable picture of violence. Several jurors visibly recoiled from the images, exactly the reaction Williams had hoped for. Mitchell's opening statement followed a predictably different narrative. Ladies and gentlemen, what we have here is a rush to judgment by investigators who decided my client was guilty before they had examined all the evidence. Jessica Thompson was struggling with alcohol dependency, as we will prove through witness testimony. On the morning in question, she was intoxicated and suffered a tragic fall that nearly cost her life. He gestured toward Reed, who had been coached to maintain an expression of profound sadness. Marcus Reed loved Jessica and her daughter Emma. He called 911 immediately, administered first aid, and cooperated fully with the investigation. The prosecution's case is built on speculation, circumstantial evidence, and the desire to find someone to blame for a terrible accident. The first week of testimony focused on the physical evidence. Dr. Marcus Webb took the stand to explain the forensic analysis, using laser pointers and detailed diagrams to show the jury exactly how. The blood spatter patterns proved Jessica had been beaten repeatedly while standing in the living room. The impact patterns are consistent with at least 6 separate strikes. Dr. Webb testified, his clinical tone making the violence seem even more horrific. The angles and velocities indicate the victim was stationary during the assault, trapped, and unable to escape her attacker. Mitchell's cross-examination was aggressive, but ultimately ineffective. Isn't it possible, Dr. Webb, that these patterns could have been created by a person falling and striking multiple surfaces during that fall? Absolutely not, Dr. Webb replied firmly. The physics simply don't support that theory. What we see here is classic evidence of sustained blunt force trauma delivered by an attacker. The hospital testimony proved equally damaging to Reed's case. Dr. Sarah Chun, the emergency room physician who had treated Jessica, described injuries that were completely inconsistent with a fall downstairs. I've treated hundreds of fall victims in my career, Dr. Chun explained to the riveted jury. Ms. Thompson's injuries showed a pattern I've only seen in cases of severe domestic violence, multiple impact sites, defensive wounds on her hands and forearms, and trauma patterns that suggest she was repeatedly struck while trying to protect her head and vital organs. The most emotionally devastating testimony came from Jessica herself, peering via video link from her rehabilitation facility. The woman who had once been vibrant and articulate now spoke haltingly, her brain injury evident in every carefully chosen word. I remember. Marcus was angry, Jessica testified, her damaged memory providing only fragments of that horrific morning. Emma was crying. I tried to ... to protect her. She paused, confusion clouding her features. I don't remember falling. I remember being scared ... and then nothing. Mitchell's cross-examination of Jessica was necessarily gentle attacking. A brain-injured domestic violence victim would have been political suicide, but he managed to establish that her memory was severely compromised. Ms. Thompson, you testified that you don't remember falling, correct? Yes. In fact, you don't remember most of that morning, do you? No. The doctor said my memory might never come back. So it's possible that you were intoxicated and fell, exactly as Mr. Reed described, but you simply can't remember it. Jessica looked confused and distressed. I don't know. Maybe? It was exactly the opening Mitchell needed, and Williams could see the doubt creeping into some jurors' faces. Without Emma's testimony, the case remained strong, but not ironclad. A single holdout juror could result in a hung jury, potentially allowing Reed to escape justice entirely. Diana Reed's testimony via video conference from Phoenix proved devastating to the defense. Reed's ex-wife described years of escalating abuse that followed an identical pattern to what Jessica had experienced. "He isolated me from my friends and family," Diana testified, her voice steady despite the obvious emotional cost. Then came the pushing, the slapping, always followed by apologies and promises to change. "By the end, I was afraid he would kill me if I tried to leave." Mitchell objected repeatedly during Diana's testimony, arguing that her allegations were unproven and irrelevant to the current case. But Judge Patricia Williams allowed most of it, ruling that the pattern evidence was crucial for the jury to understand Reed's character and history. As the second week of testimony began, Williams faced the decision she had been dreading: whether to call Emma Thompson to testify. The little girl had made remarkable progress with Dr. Chun, and had even begun speaking in short sentences to her aunt, Linda, and Detective Martinez, but asking her to relive the worst moment of her young life in front of strangers seemed almost cruel. "She's as ready as she'll ever be," Dr. Chun advised during a consultation in the judge's chambers. "Emma has been working with play therapists to process her trauma. She understands the difference between truth and lies, and she's demonstrated clear recall of events from that morning." Judge Williams studied the psychological evaluations carefully. At 61, she had presided over hundreds of cases involving child witnesses, but none quite like this. The courtroom environment could be re-traumatizing for a 4-year-old who's already endured so much. "That's why we're requesting special accommodations," Williams responded. "Closed chambers, limited personnel, and permission for Detective Martinez and her K-9 partner to be present for emotional support." Mitchell fought the request vigorously, arguing that his client had the right to face his accuser in open court. But the judge ultimately ruled in favor of the prosecution, understanding that Emma's well-being had to take precedence over legal tradition. The stage was set for the most unusual and emotionally charged testimony in the courthouse's history. Traumatized 4-year-old girl, a gentle German shepherd, and the truth that would determine whether justice prevailed or evil walked free. The mahogany-paneled chambers of Judge Patricia Williams felt like a sanctuary compared to the circus atmosphere of the main courtroom. Soft afternoon light filtered through tall windows, casting gentle shadows across the Persian rug where a small chair had been positioned child-sized and covered in cheerful yellow fabric that seemed almost absurdly bright in the somber legal setting. Today would determine whether 4-year-old Emma Thompson could find the courage to speak the words that might put her mother's attacker behind bars forever. Detective Sarah Martinez stood near the window with Rex at her side, both of them radiating calm professionalism despite the emotional weight of the moment. The German shepherd had been bathed and groomed to perfection for this crucial appearance, his dark coat gleaming and his amber eyes alert but peaceful. Over the past 6 months, Rex had become Emma's anchor in a world turned upside down by violence and trauma. Emma entered the chamber holding tightly to her Aunt Linda's hand, her small body dwarfed by the formal legal setting, despite Judge Williams' efforts to make the space as child-friendly as possible. The little girl wore a pale blue dress with tiny white flowers, Linda's careful choice to make her appear young and innocent without being overly dramatic. Emma's blonde curls had been braided with small ribbons, and she clutched a worn stuffed elephant that had become her constant companion during the long months of recovery. Judge Williams, a grandmother of 3, had removed her intimidating black robes and sat behind her desk in a simple gray suit, hoping to appear less authoritative and more approachable. At 61, she had presided over dozens of cases involving child witnesses, but none quite like this, where so much depended on the testimony of someone barely out of toddlerhood. "Hello, Emma," the judge said softly, her voice warm and grandmotherly. "I'm Judge Williams, but you can call me Judge Pat if you'd like." I've heard you've been very brave, and I want you to know that everyone here cares about you very much. Emma's response was to press closer to Linda's leg, her eyes darting nervously around the room before settling on Rex. The familiar sight of the gentle German shepherd seemed to provide some comfort, and she managed a tiny nod of acknowledgement. Prosecutor Janet Williams took her seat at the small conference table. Her usually commanding courtroom presence softened for this delicate moment. Across from her, defense attorney Jonathan Mitchell sat with obvious reluctance, his body language broadcasting his belief that this entire proceeding was inappropriate and potentially illegal. Your Honor, Mitchell interjected before the questioning could begin, I must renew my objection to this entire process. My client has the constitutional right to confront his accusers in open court. This closed chamber hearing denies him due process and creates an atmosphere of assumed guilt. Judge Williams fixed him with a stern look that had silenced countless attorneys over her career. Mr. Mitchell, we've already litigated this issue. The Supreme Court has repeatedly upheld special accommodations for child witnesses in cases involving trauma. Your objections are noted for the record, but we're proceeding as planned. The court stenographer sat unobtrusively in the corner, her fingers poised over the keys that would capture every word of what might become the most important testimony in Cleveland's legal history. Even she seemed to understand the gravity of the moment, her usual professional detachment replaced by visible concern for the small witness. Dr. Patricia Chun, a child psychologist who had worked with Emma throughout her recovery, observed from a chair near the door. Her presence was both for Emma's comfort and to provide professional assessment if the child showed signs of severe distress that would require stopping the proceedings. Linda guided Emma to the small yellow chair, kneeling beside her with the practiced patience of a kindergarten teacher. Remember what we talked about, sweetie, she whispered. Just tell the truth about what you saw, and if you get scared, look at Rex. He's here to keep you safe. Emma settled into the chair, her small hands folding the stuffed elephant in her lap as her wide blue eyes surveyed the adults surrounding her. Rex, sensing the tension in the room, moved slightly closer and lay down where Emma could see him. Clearly, his presence a visible reminder of safety and protection. Prosecutor Williams began with the gentlest possible questions, her voice soft and encouraging. Emma, do you know why we're all here today? The little girl nodded slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. To talk about the bad day. That's right, sweetheart. Can you tell us your full name? Emma Rose Thompson. Her voice was small but clear, and everyone in the room felt a collective sense of relief that she was able to respond. And how old are you, Emma? She held up 4 fingers, then seemed to remember she needed to speak aloud. 4. Do you know the difference between telling the truth and telling a lie? Emma's brow furrowed with the seriousness of the question. Truth is real. Lies are not real. Mommy says always tell the truth. Judge Williams made notes, satisfied that Emma demonstrated sufficient understanding to proceed. The preliminary questions continued for several minutes, establishing Emma's relationship with her mother, her understanding of her surroundings, her ability to distinguish between real events and imagination. Then came the crucial moment. Prosecutor Williams pulled out a photograph, not of the crime scene, which would have been traumatizing, but a family photo showing Jessica, Emma, and Marcus Reed at a park on what appeared to be a happy day. Emma, can you tell me who these people are? Emma looked at the photo for a long moment, her small fingers tightening around her stuffed elephant. That's Mommy, she said, pointing to Jessica with a sad smile. That's me. Then her finger moved to Marcus Reed, and her entire demeanor changed. Her body tensed, her breathing became shallow, and she pulled the elephant closer to her chest. And who is this person? Williams asked gently, indicating Reed in the photograph. Emma stared at the image for nearly 30 seconds that felt like an eternity to everyone present. Her eyes darted to Rex, who remained perfectly still, but seemed to radiate calm support. Finally, in a voice so quiet that everyone had to lean forward to hear, she whispered, "Marcus." "Emma, I need to ask you about the morning when Mommy got hurt. Do you remember that day?" The question hung in the air like a physical presence. Emma's lower lip began to tremble, and for a moment, it seemed she might retreat back into the protective silence that had shielded her for so many months. Dr. Chun started to rise from her chair, ready to intervene if the child showed signs of severe distress. But then something remarkable happened. Emma looked directly at Rex, and the German Shepherd, with the intuition that made him exceptional at his job, lifted his head slightly and made soft eye contact with the frightened child. In that moment of connection, something passed between them: trust, courage, or perhaps simply the understanding that she was not alone. "I remember," Emma said, her voice gaining strength. "I was hiding." The adults in the room collectively held their breath. After months of silence, medical intervention, therapy sessions, and legal maneuvering, the key witness was finally ready to speak. "Where were you hiding, sweetheart?" Williams asked, her voice carefully controlled, despite the excitement building. "In her chest, behind the big chair. The blue one where Mommy reads stories." "And what did you see from your hiding place?" Emma's eyes remained fixed on Rex as she began to speak, the words coming slowly, but with increasing clarity. For the first time since that terrible October morning, Emma Thompson was ready to tell the world what really happened in the living room, where her childhood innocence was shattered forever. The next words from this brave little girl would either ensure justice was served or allow a dangerous predator to walk free. Everything hinged on the courage of a 4-year-old who had found her voice through the gentle eyes of a German shepherd, who understood that sometimes the smallest witnesses carry the heaviest truths. The silence in Judge Williams' chambers stretched like a taut wire, every adult holding their breath as 4-year-old Emma Thompson sat perfectly still in her small yellow chair. Her blue eyes remained fixed on Rex, the German shepherd who had become her lifeline in a world that had suddenly turned dangerous and unpredictable. The stuffed elephant in her lap seemed to pulse with a rapid heartbeat, and Detective Sarah Martinez could see the internal battle playing out across the child's expressive face. Dr. Patricia Chun leaned forward slightly in her observer's chair, her trained eye watching for signs of dissociation or psychological retreat. In her 20 years of treating traumatized children, she had learned to read the subtle signals that indicated when a young mind was approaching its breaking point. Emma was close to that edge, teetering between the safety of silence and the terrifying vulnerability of truth. Prosecutor Janet Williams sat frozen at the conference table, afraid that any movement might shatter the delicate moment. Her entire case, months of investigation, forensic analysis, witness interviews, and legal strategy balanced on the words of this tiny witness who looked so fragile. She might disappear entirely if anyone spoke too loudly. Defense attorney Jonathan Mitchell watched the proceedings with barely concealed impatience, his legal instincts telling him that this entire exercise was inappropriate and potentially prejudicial to his client. He had prepared multiple objections, ready to interrupt if the questioning became leading or coercive, but something about Emma's obvious distress made him hesitate to appear heartless in front of the judge. Emma's Aunt Linda knelt beside the small chair, her presence a constant source of comfort and stability. As a kindergarten teacher, Linda understood the fragile psychology of children under stress, and she could see that Emma was struggling to find words for experiences that no child should ever have to articulate. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. Rex, with the intuitive sensitivity that made him exceptional at his job, sensed Emma's internal turmoil and made a decision that would change everything. Slowly, deliberately, he rose from his position near the window, and padded across the Persian rug toward Emma's chair. Judge Williams started to intervene. Court proceedings had strict protocols about animal behavior, but something in Rex's demeanor stopped her. This wasn't random movement. This was a trained professional responding to a human in distress. Rex approached Emma's chair with infinite gentleness, his large frame moving with surprising grace. When he reached her side, he performed an action that would later be described in court transcripts as witness support behavior. He gently placed his magnificent head near Emma's small hand and looked up at her with those wise amber eyes that had seen human suffering and somehow learned to offer comfort without judgment. Emma's response was immediate and profound. Her rigid posture softened as her tiny fingers made contact with Rex's warm fur. And for the first time since entering the chamber, a ghost of a smile flickered across her face. The connection between child and dog was almost mystical. Two beings who had learned to communicate beyond the limitations of human language. Very slowly, as if the movement required enormous courage, Emma lifted her free hand and pointed directly at Rex. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of absolute truth. "Good boy." Those two simple words electrified the room. Everyone understood immediately that Emma wasn't just praising Rex. She was making a fundamental distinction, categorizing the world into safe and unsafe, protector and predator. Rex represented everything good and trustworthy in her traumatized universe. Dr. Chun felt tears welling in her eyes as she witnessed the breakthrough she had been working toward for months. This wasn't just speech. This was Emma reclaiming her voice and her power to distinguish between good and evil. But Emma wasn't finished. With Rex's encouraging presence beside her, she turned her gaze toward the large monitor that had been set up for video testimony. On the screen, Marcus Reed sat in the defendant's chair in the main courtroom, his carefully composed expression unable to hide the anxiety in his eyes as he waited for the testimony that could destroy his life. Emma stared at the monitor for what seemed like an eternity, her small face cycling through emotions too complex for her age: fear, recognition, anger, and finally, a steely determination that shocked everyone present. When she spoke again, her voice was stronger, clearer, infused with the unshakable certainty that only truth can provide. "Bad man." The words hit the chamber like a physical force. Prosecutor Williams felt her heart skip as she realized the magnitude of what had just occurred. In the most elemental language possible, Emma Thompson had just identified her mother's attacker with devastating clarity. Defense attorney Mitchell shot to his feet, his objections spilling out in a rush torrent. "Your Honor, this is prejudicial and leading. The child is clearly being influenced by the presence of law enforcement and the suggestive nature of this entire proceeding." But Judge Williams raised her hand for silence, her experienced eye recognizing something profound happening. Before her, "Mr. Mitchell," the child made spontaneous statements without prompting from counsel. "Please be seated." Emma wasn't done. With Rex's solid presence anchoring her courage, she began to elaborate in her limited 4-year-old vocabulary, each word carefully chosen and devastatingly accurate. "He hurt Mommy," she said, pointing again at the monitor where Reed's face had gone pale. "Mommy was crying. I was scared. I hid." Dr. Chun later described this moment as remarkable therapeutic breakthrough achieved through animal-assisted intervention. Emma had found her voice not through months of traditional therapy, but through the unconditional acceptance and protection offered by a trained police dog who understood trauma without judgment. The court stenographer's fingers flew across her keys, capturing every precious word of testimony that legal experts would later call the most emotionally powerful evidence in Ohio criminal court history. These weren't just the words of a witness. They were the voice of innocence speaking truth to power, backed by the unwavering support of a 4-legged guardian angel. Emma's testimony continued for another 10 minutes, her vocabulary expanding as her confidence grew. She described hiding behind the big blue chair, hearing loud, scary noises, and seeing Mommy fall down and not get up. Most damaging of all, she consistently identified Marcus Reed as the bad man who hurt Mommy whenever shown his photograph or image on the video monitor. Mitchell's cross-examination was necessarily brief and gentle, attacking a traumatized 4-year-old would have been political suicide for any defense attorney. His questions focused on Emma's ability to distinguish reality from imagination, but her responses were consistent, detailed, and delivered with the straightforward honesty that only young children possess. "Emma, are you sure about what you saw?" Mitchell asked carefully. Without hesitation, Emma pointed to Rex and repeated, "Good boy." Then she pointed to the monitor showing Reed and stated firmly, "Bad man hurt Mommy." As the testimony concluded, Emma looked around the room at all the adults who had been hanging on her every word. For months, she had carried the weight of terrible knowledge in silence, her young mind struggling to process experiences beyond her comprehension. Now, with Rex beside her and the truth finally spoken, she seemed lighter somehow, as if sharing her burden had begun the healing process. Judge Williams declared a recess, but everyone in the chamber understood that the case had just taken a dramatic turn. Emma Thompson's 2 simple words, "Good boy" and "bad man," had shattered the silence that had protected Marcus Reed for months. Justice finally had its voice, delivered in the pure, unfiltered truth that only a child's testimony could provide. The transformation in Emma Thompson was nothing short of miraculous. What had begun as 2 whispered words, "Good boy" and "bad man," had opened a dam that had been holding back months of traumatic memories. With Rex lying protectively beside her small yellow chair, his warm presence radiating safety and unconditional acceptance, Emma found a courage she didn't know she possessed. Dr. Patricia Chun watched in professional amazement as the breakthrough unfolded before her eyes. In 20 years of treating traumatized children, she had never witnessed such a dramatic shift in a young patient's ability to process and communicate trauma. Emma's selective mutism, which had seemed impenetrable just hours before, was dissolving under the healing power of interspecies connection and the child's innate need to be heard. Prosecutor Janet Williams leaned forward carefully, her legal instincts telling her to proceed with extreme caution, while her heart raced with the knowledge that Emma's expanding testimony could seal Marcus Reed's conviction beyond any reasonable doubt. The courtroom stenographer's fingers moved across her keys with practiced precision, capturing every precious word of what would become legendary testimony in Ohio legal history. "Emma," Williams said softly, "you mentioned hiding behind the big blue chair. Can you tell us more about what you saw from your hiding place?" Emma's small hand continued stroking Rex's fur as she gathered her thoughts. The German Shepherd remained perfectly still, his training and natural empathy making him the ideal therapeutic companion for this crucial moment. His steady breathing seemed to calm Emma's own rapid heartbeat as she began to share details that had been locked away in her traumatized mind for months. "I was playing with my dollies," Emma began, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Then Marcus started yelling at Mommy, really loud yelling. She covered her ears with her small hands, recreating the memory. I got scared and went to hide." Judge Patricia Williams made careful notes, her grandmother's heart breaking at the innocence in Emma's voice as she described witnessing domestic violence. The judge had presided over hundreds of domestic abuse cases, but hearing it from a 4-year-old's perspective made the brutality seem even more horrific. "What kind of yelling did you hear?" Williams asked gently. Emma's brow furrowed as she tried to find words appropriate for her limited vocabulary. "Mean words, bad words. Marcus said Mommy was ... She struggled with the memory, her small face scrunching with concentration. He said bad things about Mommy leaving. He was really, really mad. Defense attorney Jonathan Mitchell sat rigidly in his chair, his legal mind calculating the devastating impact of this testimony on his client's case. Every word from Emma's mouth was another nail in Reed's legal coffin, delivered with the unshakable authenticity that only a child witness could provide. Emma continued her account, her confidence growing as Rex's calming presence anchored her. Courage. Then I heard Mommy crying. She was saying, "Please stop," and Emma's upstairs. But I wasn't upstairs. I was behind the chair. The detail about her mother, trying to protect her by misdirecting Reed, hit everyone in the chamber like a physical blow. Even Mitchell felt his throat tighten at the image of Jessica Thompson, in her moment of terror, still trying to shield her daughter from witnessing violence. "What happened next, sweetheart?" Williams asked, her professional composure beginning to crack at the emotional weight of Emma's testimony. Emma's voice became quieter, but her words remained clear and precise. Marcus grabbed Mommy. He was shaking her really hard. Mommy was trying to get away, but Marcus wouldn't let her. Dr. Chun made notes on her pad, documenting the psychological significance of Emma's expanding narrative. The child was demonstrating remarkable resilience and cognitive processing, using Rex's presence as an emotional anchor to navigate through traumatic memories that would challenge adults. "Then what did you see?" Williams prompted gently. Emma's small hand tightened in Rex's fur, and the dog seemed to sense her distress, shifting slightly to provide even more physical contact. Marcus hit Mommy, not just once. Lots of times. She demonstrated with her free hand, making small hitting motions in the air. On her head, on her tummy. Mommy fell down, and Marcus kept hitting. The chamber fell silent, except for the soft clicking of the stenographer's keys. Mitchell started to object to the graphic nature of the testimony, then stopped himself, recognizing that interrupting a traumatized child's account would appear heartless to the judge. Emma's testimony grew more detailed and devastating as she continued. There was blood on Mommy's face. She wasn't moving anymore. I wanted to help her, but I was too scared to come out. Tears began streaming down her small face, but her voice remained steady, as if she understood the importance of sharing her burden. Marcus was breathing really hard. He looked at Mommy on the floor, and then he looked around the room. I thought he was going to find me, so I made myself really small behind the chair. Judge Williams felt her own eyes welling with tears as she watched this brave little girl relive the worst moments of her young life. The courage required for Emma to share these memories was extraordinary, made possible only by the therapeutic presence of Rex and months of careful psychological preparation. Then what happened? Williams asked, though part of her wanted to spare Emma from reliving any more of that terrible morning. Marcus went to the kitchen. I heard him talking on the phone, but I couldn't hear all the words. He sounded different, not mad anymore, but scared. When he came back, he was crying too. This detail was particularly damaging to Reed's defense. Emma was describing behavior consistent with someone realizing the severity of what they had done and beginning to fabricate a cover story. Did you see what Marcus did when he came back from the kitchen? Emma nodded solemnly. He knelt down by Mommy and started touching her face, saying, wake up, but not in a nice way. Like he was pretending to be sad. Dr. Chun looked up sharply from her notes. Emma's observation about Reed's manufactured grief was remarkably sophisticated for a 4-year-old, suggesting she possessed an intuitive understanding of authentic versus performed emotions. Emma's voice grew even quieter as she approached the most traumatic part of her account. Then the police came. The lady police officer was nice, and she had Rex with her. Rex looked at me, and I wasn't as scared anymore, because dogs are good. They don't hurt people like bad men do. Detective Sarah Martinez felt tears streaming down her face as Emma described their first meeting. She had sensed the connection between Rex and the traumatized child that day, but hearing Emma's perspective on that moment was overwhelming. When I saw Rex, I knew some people were good and some people were bad. Marcus was bad because he hurt Mommy. Rex was good because he made me feel safe. The testimony continued for another 15 minutes, with Emma providing details about the aftermath hiding until Detective Martinez coaxed her out. The ambulance taking her mother away, the confusion and terror of that entire day. Throughout it all, Rex remained her constant companion, his presence transforming terror into manageable fear, silence into courage. When Emma finally finished speaking, the chamber remained silent for several moments. Everyone present understood. They had witnessed something extraordinary, a traumatized child, finding her voice and using it to seek justice for her mother and protection for other potential victims. Judge Williams called for a brief recess, but the damage to Reed's defense was complete. Emma Thompson had done more than testify. She had painted an unforgettable picture of domestic violence from the perspective of its most innocent victim, delivered with the devastating honesty that only a child's truth could provide. The jury deliberation room in the Cuyahoga County Courthouse buzzed with intense discussion as 12 citizens grappled with the most emotionally charged case many had ever encountered. After 2 weeks of testimony, mountains of forensic evidence, and Emma Thompson's devastating eyewitness account, the decision seemed clear to most. But the weight of convicting a man, based partially on a 4-year-old's testimony, demanded careful consideration. Jury Foreman Robert Martinez, a 53-year-old construction supervisor and father of 3, led his fellow jurors through each piece of evidence methodically. The blood spatter analysis, the medical testimony, Jessica's partial memories, and the pattern of abuse revealed through Reed's ex-wife's testimony all painted a consistent picture of a violent predator who had finally crossed the line from abuse to attempted murder. But it was Emma's testimony that had sealed the case in most jurors' minds. Her clear identification of Reed as the bad man, her detailed account of witnessing the assault, and her sophisticated observations about Reed's behavior after the attack had provided the missing piece that transformed circumstantial evidence into absolute certainty. "That little girl's courage was extraordinary," whispered Maria Santos, a kindergarten teacher who served as juror number 7. "I've worked with traumatized children, and what Emma did in that chamber, speaking truth to power despite her fear, that's not something you can coach or fake." The deliberation lasted exactly 1 hour and 47 minutes. When they returned to the main courtroom, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Marcus Reed sat at the defense table, his carefully maintained composure finally cracking as he faced the possibility of spending the next 2 decades behind bars. His attorney, Jonathan Mitchell, reviewed his notes one final time, already preparing for the appeals process he suspected would be necessary. Detective Sarah Martinez sat in the gallery with Rex beside her, both of them representing the Cleveland Police Department's commitment to justice for domestic violence victims. Over the past 6 months, Sarah had become more than just the investigating officer. She had become Emma's advocate, protector, and the bridge between a traumatized child and a justice system that desperately needed to hear her voice. Judge Patricia Williams called the court to order, her experienced eye reading the jury's body language and already sensing their decision. In 37 years on the bench, she had developed an intuition about jury verdicts that rarely proved wrong, and everything about this group's demeanor suggested they had reached a unanimous conclusion. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Williams asked formally. Foreman Martinez stood, his voice steady despite the emotional weight of the moment. "We have, Your Honor. On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, how do you find guilty?" The single word echoed through the packed courtroom like thunder. Marcus Reed's face went ashen as his worst nightmare became reality. At the prosecution table, Janet Williams felt a surge of professional satisfaction mixed with profound relief that justice would finally be served. On the charge of aggravated domestic violence, how do you find? Guilty. On the charge of child endangerment, how do you find? Guilty. Reed collapsed forward in his chair, the weight of 15 to 25 years in prison crushing his last hopes of freedom. His mother, sitting in the front row of the gallery, began sobbing uncontrollably. The dreams she had harbored about her son's innocence finally shattered by the undeniable truth. The sentencing hearing took place 3 weeks later, providing time for victim impact statements and psychological evaluations. Jessica Thompson, still recovering from her traumatic brain injury, attended via video link from her rehabilitation facility. Though her speech remained halting and her memory fragmented, her presence served as a powerful reminder of Reed's violence and its lasting consequences. Marcus Reed stole more than just my health, Jessica testified, her words carefully rehearsed. With the help of speech therapists. He stole my daughter's sense of security, her trust in the world, and her belief that home is supposed to be safe. But Emma's courage in speaking the truth has given us both something back, the knowledge that justice exists, and that even the smallest voices can make the biggest difference. Linda Thompson, now Emma's legal guardian, provided a heartbreaking account of little girl's journey from selective mutism to gradual recovery. Emma still has nightmares, Linda testified, but she also has hope. She talks about Detective Martinez and Rex almost every day, crediting them with helping her find her voice again. This case has shown her that there are good people in the world who will fight to protect children like her. Dr. Patricia Chun testified about Emma's remarkable psychological recovery, attributing much of her progress to the therapeutic relationship she had developed with Rex and the sense of empowerment that came from speaking her truth in court. Emma's testimony wasn't just crucial for this legal case, Dr. Chun explained. It was crucial for her own healing process. By transforming from victim to witness to survivor, she reclaimed her power and began to heal. Judge Williams imposed the maximum sentence allowed by law, 25 years in prison for attempted murder, with additional sentences for domestic violence and child endangerment to run concurrently. Reed would be eligible for parole in 18 years, but given the severity of his crimes and the compelling nature of the evidence against him, early release seemed unlikely. Mr. Reed, Judge Williams addressed the defendant directly. Your actions on October 15th were not those of a man overcome by passion or circumstance. They were the calculated violence of a predator who systematically terrorized and ultimately tried to murder a defenseless woman in front of her 3-year-old daughter. The courage shown by that little girl in testifying against you stands in stark contrast to your cowardice in trying to blame your victim for your own brutality. The case garnered national media attention, with Emma's story inspiring legislative changes in how courts handle child witnesses. The Emma Thompson Protocol became a model for other jurisdictions, establishing guidelines for animal-assisted testimony and specialized procedures for traumatized young witnesses. 6 months after Reed's conviction, Emma Thompson celebrated her 5th birthday at her aunt's home in Cleveland Heights, surrounded by friends from her new school and the extended family of supporters who had rallied around her during the trial. Detective Martinez and Rex were guests of honor, bringing presents and representing the law enforcement community's ongoing commitment to protecting children. Emma had blossomed in her aunt's care, attending kindergarten and participating in play therapy that helped her process her trauma. Though she still occasionally suffered nightmares, her resilience and natural optimism were gradually overcoming the shadows of that terrible October morning. The birthday party featured a special moment when Emma presented Rex with a handmade card decorated with crayon drawings of dogs and police officers. Inside, in her careful 5-year-old handwriting, she had written, "Thank you for helping me." Be brave. You are the goodest boy ever. Jessica Thompson, though permanently changed by her injuries, had recovered enough to live independently in an assisted living facility. Her cognitive abilities remained limited, but she retained her memories of Emma and their life together before Marcus Reed's violence shattered their world. Mother and daughter visited regularly, slowly rebuilding their relationship within the new reality of Jessica's limitations. The Cleveland Police Department recognized the success of the Emma Thompson case by expanding their K-9 program to include specialized training in victim support and witness assistance. Rex became the prototype for a new generation of police dogs, trained not just in criminal apprehension, but in providing therapeutic comfort to traumatized witnesses. Detective Martinez was promoted to sergeant and assigned to lead the new crimes against children unit, with Rex remaining as her partner. Together, they helped dozens of other young victims find their voices and seek justice against their abusers. On the first anniversary of Reed's conviction, Emma and Linda visited the courthouse where justice had been served. Emma, now confident and articulate, placed a small bouquet of flowers at the memorial plaque that had been installed in her honor. In recognition of Emma Rose Thompson, whose courage proved that truth has no age limit and justice knows no boundaries. As they walked down the courthouse steps together, Emma looked up at her aunt with bright, hopeful eyes that had seen too much, but had found the strength to speak truth to power. "Aunt Linda," she said, "I'm glad I was brave that day. Mommy is safe now, and so are other mommies and little kids." The healing would continue for years to come, but justice had been served, and a little girl's whispered words had changed not just one case, but an entire system's approach to protecting its most vulnerable witnesses.